Bing Crosby, just hearing his name probably makes you think of a smooth as butter voice. But what if I told you his real-life story wasn't as sweet as his songs? There was a much darker reality, one that would haunt his family for years. From the perfectly polished image to a father whose words and actions drove his own children down a tragic path, stay tuned because this story isn't just about a music legend, it's about Bing Crosby's hidden struggles behind fame and family legacy. Bing Crosby wasn't just a star, he was the star. His voice shaped an entire era, influencing just about every singer who came after him. But behind the charm, the fame, and the smooth melodies, there was a darkness that few people saw. His family life wasn't the picture-perfect dream people assumed. In fact, his personal struggles and confessions cast a long, painful shadow, one that eventually led two of his sons down a tragic path. But what was it about his private life that became so unbearable? And how did his own words contribute to the heartbreaking choices his children made? Nobody expected a legend to be born in a quiet Pacific Northwest home, but that's exactly how Bing Crosby's story began. Harry Lillis Crosby Jr. was born on May 3, 1903, long before his voice would dominate radios, movie screens, and concert halls. But how did a kid from Spokane end up shaping the sound of an entire generation? His parents, Harry L. Crosby, an English-born bookkeeper, and Catherine Harrigan, the daughter of an Irish builder, had no idea their fourth of 7 children would become a household name. By 1906, the family moved to Spokane, Washington, in search of better opportunities. Now, here's where things get interesting. 6-year-old Harry Lillis Crosby wasn't always Bing. He got that nickname from a local boy who noticed his obsession with the Bingville Bugle, a funny newspaper column. At first, he was called Bingo, but soon it was shortened to Bing, a name that would stick for life. The summer of 1917 was a game-changer for young Bing Crosby. Working backstage at Spokane's auditorium, he got a front-row seat to performances by legends like Al Jolson, an experience that left a lasting impression, even if he later downplayed it. But could anyone really watch a showman like Jolson and not feel inspired? Fast forward, and Crosby didn't just become famous, he became one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. But here's the kicker, he wasn't just a singer. He was the first true multimedia star, making waves in radio, film, and music all at once. Now, let's rewind a bit. When little Bing was just 3, his family decided to pack up and move. Where to? A rough-and-tumble mining and lumber town. Can you imagine how different his life might have been if they had stayed put? Music was always part of Bing Crosby's world, thanks to his father, Harry, who happened to own one of the first record players in Spokane. That meant young Bing grew up hearing the voices of legends like Al Jolson long before he became one himself. By the time he started at Gonzaga University, while his Jesuit education emphasized toughness and discipline, he found his true strengths elsewhere. He flourished in athletics, dominated public speaking, and had a way with words that made him stand out in debate. Law school at Gonzaga was a short-lived chapter. Music was calling, and he answered by teaming up with pianist Al Rinker to chase his dreams. Early on, he wasn't exactly the most reliable guy, his jazz-age partying got in the way, but his natural talent and charisma couldn't be ignored. Even on the field, Bing had fierce rivalries, especially with Bob Hope. But instead of just being competitors, they built a friendship that led to one of Hollywood's most iconic collaborations, the Road to Film trilogy. Their chemistry was unmatched, their impact, timeless. By 1926, Bing Crosby's talent was impossible to ignore. While performing at the Los Angeles Metropolitan Theater, he caught the eye of Paul Whiteman, one of the biggest band leaders of the time. But how often does a young singer get a break like that? At the time, Bing was already making waves with his singing partner, Al Rinker. The duo had been performing together since their Spokane days, and by December 6, 1926, they made their big debut at Chicago's Tivoli Theater, earning a solid $150 a week, a decent paycheck for rising stars. Whiteman saw potential and decided to take things up a notch. He brought in pianist and songwriter Harry Barris, turning the duo into a trio. With that, the Rhythm Boys were born. The group didn't just sing, they helped define the sound of the era, working alongside legendary names like Mildred Bailey, Hoagy Carmichael, Eddie Lang, Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey, and Bixby DeBeck. Their voices, style, and harmonies were something fresh, and the music world was paying attention. By 1928, Bing had risen to become the leading voice of the Rhythm Boys. His jazz-infused take on Old Man River became his first #1 hit, and it was clear he had something special. But when one voice starts to shine a little too brightly in a group, tensions are bound to rise, right? Bing and the rest of the Rhythm Boys weren't exactly thrilled with how things were going under Paul Whiteman, So they made a bold move, leaving to join the Gus Arnheim Orchestra. Once they signed with Brunswick Records, though, it became clear who the real standout was. Bing's voice took center stage, and the others found themselves fading into the background. It wasn't long before disagreements led to a split, and just like that, the Rhythm Boys were no more. But for Bing, this was just the beginning. Stepping out on his own, he delivered hit after hit, including At Your Command, I Surrender Dear, and Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams, all written by his former bandmate. Bing Crosby didn't just find success in the 1930s, he defined it. His smooth, effortless voice made him one of the most famous vocalists of the decade, landing him in 10 of the top 50 songs in 1931, either solo or alongside other artists. In 1932, he made a splash on the big screen with The Big Broadcast, his first feature film. Just a few years later, in 1939, he locked in a long-term deal with Decca, a record company founded by Jack Kapp, setting the stage for an incredible career in music. Radio wasn't far behind either. His solo debut on CBS, backed by the Carl Fenton Orchestra, was just the beginning. By 1936, he had taken over NBC's Kraft Music Hall, replacing none other than his former boss, Paul Whiteman. He held on to that role for the next decade, solidifying his voice as a staple in American households. But his influence didn't stop there. Singers like Frank Sinatra, Perry Como, Dean Martin, Dick Haymes, and even legends like John Lennon and Elvis Presley all credited Crosby for shaping their vocal styles. With recording technology evolving rapidly, his relaxed, intimate way of singing set the gold standard for generations to come. During World War II, Yank magazine credited him as the man who did more than anyone else to lift the spirits of American troops overseas. His voice wasn't just entertainment, it was comfort, a reminder of home during the darkest times. But did you know that by 1948, he was the most well-liked man in America? That's correct, he even outranked Jackie Robinson and Pope Pius XII in a national poll. His influence stretched beyond music. Music Digest reported that in 1948, over half of the 80,000 weekly hours of recorded radio music in the US featured Crosby's recordings. That kind of dominance was. And get this, he wasn't just a radio guy. He made the jump to movies and nailed it, which is a big reason why his legacy lasted so long. But here's where things get complicated. Behind the scenes, his personal life wasn't as polished as his performances. He struggled with drinking, and his family life was far from picture perfect. His relationship with his wife, Dixie, and their kids? Messy. Some say he was too strict, others defend him. Then came 1952, when Dixie passed away. That hit him hard and left a deep mark, both personally and professionally. It was a turning point in his life, one that he never fully recovered from. Even with the challenges he faced offstage, his impact on entertainment, both artistically and technologically, remains unmatched. His influence didn't just fade with time, it shaped the industry in ways still felt today. But here's the thing, while everyone knew his voice, very few really knew the man behind it. Even his close friends, like Phil Harris, admitted that Crosby was a tough guy to figure out. Ever wonder what it's like to be famous but still a mystery to those around you? When he took on the role of Frank Elgin in The Country Girl, people weren't sure he could pull off such a serious, troubled character. Can you imagine the pressure? But he proved the doubters wrong, delivering a performance that impressed even the harshest critics. Of course, Crosby wasn't just a singer and actor, he was a moment. During World War II, his rendition of White Christmas became more than just a song. It was a lifeline, bringing comfort and nostalgia to soldiers and families alike. Think about it, how many artists today have a song that's still as iconic decades later? Outside of entertainment, he had a life full of passion projects. He loved baseball and horse racing and even gave back in a big way, leaving a significant donation to Gonzaga University. But despite his success, his personal life wasn't all glitz and glamour. His parenting? Far from perfect. His sons, Dennis, Lindsay, and Gary, grew up in Hollywood spotlight, but they faced their own set of struggles, ones that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with personal battles. Their stories tell a deeper, more painful truth about life behind the public eye. Take Lindsay Crosby, for example. Born in Los Angeles on January 5, 1934, he was the son of Bing and Dixie Lee. Appears glamorous, doesn't it? And in some ways, it was. The Crosby family had wealth, status, and a front row seat to Hollywood's golden era. But with all that came expectations, huge ones. Imagine trying to carve your own path when your dad is one of the biggest names in showbiz. Talk about pressure. Unlike his father, Lindsay didn't rise to fame in the same way. Sure, he dipped his toes into acting, landing roles in movies like The Big Night, 1951, and The Star in the Story, 1955, but he never quite reached the same level of success. Did he want to? Or was he just trying to live up to what everyone expected of him? Sadly, fame wasn't the only thing that ran in the family, so did personal demons. Lindsay, like some of his siblings, struggled with alcoholism and substance abuse. Addiction became a recurring battle, something he couldn't outrun, no matter how much he tried. Lindsay Crosby's life came to a heartbreaking end on December 11, 1989, when he died by suicide at just 51 years old. The news devastated his family and those who had followed his journey, serving as a stark reminder of the struggles he faced. But was it the weight of his last name, personal demons, or something even deeper that led him down such a tragic path? Bing Crosby and his first wife, Dixie Lee, had 4 sons, Dennis, Lindsay, Philip, and Gary, along with their daughter, Mary Frances. Dennis, born on July 13, 1934, was the second son of the legendary crooner and, like his brothers, grew up in a world of privilege and high expectations. With a father known for Going My Way and White Christmas, Dennis was exposed to the entertainment industry from an early age. He had a smooth, polished singing voice, and while he appeared in public alongside his famous father and siblings, he never quite reached the same level of stardom. For years, the Crosby children were a picture-perfect family in public, smiling for cameras at events, appearing in glossy magazine spreads. But behind the scenes, life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. The pressures of living in their father's shadow, combined with personal struggles, would eventually take a heavy toll on them all. Dennis Crosby tried to carve out his own path in entertainment, but living in his father's shadow made that nearly impossible. Throughout the 50s and 60s, he worked steadily in film and television, appearing in movies like The Night the World Exploded and The Purple Hills. His big-screen journey started in 1957 with Mr. Corey, but he wasn't just limited to films. He also made guest appearances on popular shows like The Red Skelton Hour and The Jack Benny Program. No matter how hard he worked, though, he could never quite escape the weight of being Bing Crosby's son. The comparisons were constant, and the expectations were sky-high. Did that pressure make success feel out of reach? It certainly didn't make things easier. Beyond his career struggles, Dennis battled personal demons. Alcoholism ran in the family, and he wasn't immune to its grip. Sadly, on May 4, 1991, at the age of 56, he took his own life, a sorrowful conclusion to a journey marked by ambition and hardship. Gary Crosby, the eldest of Bing and Dixie Lee's children, was born in Los Angeles on June 27, 1933. Coming from a family of legendary musicians and actors, he was practically destined for show business. But while he had the talent and charisma to shine on his own, he also faced deep personal struggles as he got older. His love for music only grew stronger. Audiences were drawn to his charm and smooth vocals, and for a time, it seemed like he might escape the shadows of his famous last name. But like his brothers, the pressures of being a Crosby would weigh on him in ways the public never saw. Gary Crosby had all the talent in the world, but what made him truly stand out wasn't just his music, it was his character. While fame had a way of changing people, he never let it go to his head. Instead of chasing the spotlight for personal gain, he used his platform for something bigger, speaking out against injustice at a time when discrimination was the norm. He wasn't afraid to challenge it. Of course, growing up as the eldest son of Bing and Dixie came with its perks. He had access to a life most could only dream of, watching his father at Hollywood and in the music industry. His younger brothers, Lindsay, Philip, and Dennis, looked up to him, and in many ways, he set the tone for what it meant to be a Crosby kid. Following in his father's footsteps seemed like the natural path, and he embraced it. He wanted to be known for his voice, his stage presence, and his acting skills. His big break came early when he performed on The Bing Crosby Show, his father's popular radio program. That moment set the foundation for a career that would blend music, theater, and a passion for social change. Even before the U.S. entered World War II, Gary had a sense of responsibility beyond entertainment. In 1941, he delivered a speech to high school students, urging them to stay informed and engage with the world around them. He wasn't just another Hollywood kid, he was someone who wanted to make a difference. Fast forward to 1946, and Bing was at the top of his game in the radio world. But he wasn't satisfied yet. He had a big idea. He wanted to pre-record his live shows so they could be played back later. Seems straightforward, doesn't it? Well, not exactly. NBC, his network at the time, had a strict no recordings rule. Most people would have just accepted it and moved on, but not Bing. He wasn't about to let a little rule stand in his way. So what did he do? He jumped ship to ABC, a network with a pretty shaky reputation but a willingness to try something new. And guess what? That bold move helped change the way radio worked forever. That one decision changed the game. Suddenly, live radio was taking a back seat to pre-recorded programming. More and more stars started following Crosby's lead, and ABC went from being an underdog to a serious player in the industry. Meanwhile, his eldest son, Gary Crosby, was carving out his own path. He made his film debut in Mr. Corey, 1957, and built up a steady acting career with roles in movies like The Big Night, 1951, and The Night the World Exploded, 1957. TV audiences also saw him pop up in hit series like Playhouse 90 and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But while acting gave him some recognition, Gary had his sights set on music. He wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a star in his own right. No matter how hard he tried, making a name for himself as a singer was an uphill battle, especially with a last name tied to one of the most iconic voices in history. Gary Crosby may have carried a famous last name, but carving out his own success in music proved to be a tough road. He released songs and albums, hoping to follow in his father's footsteps, but stardom never quite came the way it had for Bing. One of the biggest struggles in Gary's life wasn't just his career, it was his complicated and painful relationship with his father. In 1983, he released Going My Own Way, a shocking memoir that pulled back the curtain on what life was really like in the Crosby household. The book revealed years of harsh punishment, neglect, and emotional and physical abuse that he and his brothers endured growing up. He also didn't shy away from talking about his own battles with addiction, painting a much darker picture of his family's reality than the public had ever seen. Gary may not have reached the same level of fame as his father, but his story left a lasting mark. His brutally honest memoir challenged the beloved image of Bing Crosby, showing a side of him that many found difficult to accept. It was a bold, unfiltered look into the pressures and pain that came with growing up in a household where perfection was expected. Sadly, Gary's life was cut short at 62 when he passed away on August 24, 1995. But his words, and his willingness to tell the truth, ensured that his story wouldn't be forgotten. With his memoir, Gary Crosby unveiled a version of Bing Crosby that shocked many. Known to the world as a charming, easygoing entertainer, Bing had a much darker presence at home, something Gary described in painful detail. The most shocking part? Gary revealed that behind his father's charming, easygoing public image was a much darker reality at home. He and his brothers, Philip, Dennis, and Lindsay, weren't just disciplined, they were severely punished. Beatings with a belt, emotional distance, and a strict, sometimes cruel, upbringing shaped their childhood. Can you imagine growing up in a household where the whole world sees your dad as this beloved entertainer, but behind closed doors, it's a completely different story? Gary didn't hold back in describing the family's struggles, including Bing's heavy drinking. According to him, it wasn't just the physical punishments that hurt, it was the emotional disconnect. Bing was so wrapped up in his career that his kids often felt ignored, abandoned, and left to figure things out on their own. How does a childhood like that shape a person? It's worth thinking about. Sadly, Gary wasn't the only one in the family who struggled. His brothers, Dennis and Lindsay, battled addiction and personal demons, and he detailed their painful journeys in his book. What started as a memoir about his own life ended up exposing deep cracks in the Crosby family, problems that had been hidden behind Hollywood's shiny exterior for decades. Reactions to the memoir were mixed. His twin brother, Dennis, didn't seem too interested in digging up the past and brushed the book off as Gary's business. He admitted that his brother had every right to be angry but didn't outright deny his claims. On the other hand, Lindsay, the youngest of the Crosby brothers, fully supported Gary's decision to share the truth. He hoped the book would finally set the record straight and put an end to the myths surrounding their famous father. Gary's story wasn't just about living in his father's shadow, it was about breaking free from it, even if it meant telling a truth the world wasn't ready to hear. Lindsay's support for Gary's book was expected, especially since he was often considered Bing's favorite among the four brothers. But even those who had been closest to their father couldn't ignore the revelations. Gary's public statements shook up the Crosby family, forcing many to re-evaluate what they thought they knew. Not everyone was on board with Gary's version of events. Bob Crosby, Bing's younger brother, was quick to defend him. At 69 years old, Bob claimed he never saw any physical punishment happening in their family. But does that change the fact that it happened? Or was it just something that stayed behind closed doors? Now, let's talk about Philip Crosby. Full name, Philip Lang Crosby, born on July 13, 1934, in Los Angeles. Being the eldest in a famous family probably came with its own set of challenges, don't you think? Imagine having a world-famous father and trying to carve out your own identity, no easy task. Of course, Philip had a big family of his own, his children Mary Elizabeth, Dixie Lee, Flip, and Philip Jr. But he also had 3 half-siblings, Harry, Mary Frances, and Nathaniel, from Bing's second marriage to Catherine Grant. Like the rest of the Crosby kids, Philip pursued an entertainment career, following in his father's footsteps. He had a steady run in show business, but like his brothers, he could never quite reach the level of stardom that came so effortlessly to Bing. Philip Crosby had a life that was anything but predictable. He dabbled in acting, playing a younger version of his father's character, Jim Hardy, in Holiday Inn, 1942. He also made guest appearances on TV and even shared the stage with his legendary dad from time to time. But Philip wasn't one to stick to just one career. He wore many hats over the years, including stockbroker and marine. By 1983, Philip Crosby took the stage for the last time at a Burbank Elks Club event. During an interview with People magazine, he admitted it had been a full year since his last performance. By then, his life had taken several twists and turns. He had already been married 4 times, 3 of his wives were showgirls from Las Vegas, and he had his fair share of trouble with the law. In 1980, he was arrested multiple times for drunk driving, despite spending 18 months in a substance abuse support group. Eventually, he told the magazine he had given up drinking. But like many in his family, the battle with addiction was lifelong. Philip's privileged upbringing was evident even in his college days. According to Chuck Moyle, his former roommate and standout fullback, Bing once had a brand new Chevrolet delivered to Philip by a chauffeur. No matter how many different paths he explored, he always stayed connected to the entertainment world through his family. But the weight of being a Crosby wasn't easy to carry. Like his brothers, Philip struggled with alcoholism and personal demons that followed him throughout his life. Those struggles affected both his career and his relationships. Philip Crosby passed away on January 13, 2004, at 69, adding to the tragic losses of the Crosby family. For those who knew him, his death was painful, another reminder of the struggles that came with being a Crosby child. Even Bing Crosby himself had admitted that he wasn't the perfect father. In a 1959 interview, he opened up about his regrets, acknowledging that he fell short in parenting. Was it too much discipline? Too little emotional support? Maybe both. He admitted to spoiling his kids financially while at the same time expecting strict discipline and hard work. But despite giving them every material advantage, he felt like he hadn't given them what truly mattered, his time and attention. Bing didn't shy away from taking responsibility, saying that he and Dixie tried their hardest as parents. But was that enough? Lindsay Crosby had a complicated reaction to his father's public confession. He had always defended Bing, but reading his father's words in an interview was deeply upsetting. It wasn't easy for him to hear that his dad felt like he had failed them. When asked about it, Bing explained that all he had wanted was to give his sons just a little of what his father had given him. But even in saying that, there was frustration, a lingering feeling that no matter what he did, it somehow wasn't enough. Bing Crosby's legendary career came to an end on October 14, 1977, when he passed away at the age of 73. But while the world mourned the loss of an entertainment icon, his family's struggles were far from over. In 1989, Lindsay Crosby tragically took his own life. Just 2 years later, Dennis followed the same heartbreaking path. Can you imagine the weight they must have carried? The expectations, the pressure, the personal battles? It makes you wonder if growing up in the shadow of fame was more of a curse than a blessing. Then, in 1995, Gary Crosby lost his fight with lung cancer, another devastating chapter in a family that had already seen so much pain. So, was his strict parenting style the real reason behind their tragic fate? Or were there deeper issues at play? What are your thoughts? Let's talk about it in the comments. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.